Perfect. All right, let me just quickly share my screen. Chat is disabled. Okay, sorry about that. I guess something's wrong. I'm not able to figure out. So please use the Q&A box if you want to just send us anything. And then we'll take it from there. Sorry about that. Cool. So yeah, welcome to our webinar today on alumni engagement and metrics, where we look at what we learned in 2022 and all the trends to watch out for in 2023. I'm Kalyan, co-founder and CEO of Almabase, and I'm super excited, that so many of you are joining us today for this really interesting webinar. Our webinars are usually around 45 minutes, but as Jenny, Jay, and I were sharing notes on the things that we should be discussing today, we realized that there's just so many insights that we may run over slightly. We'll do our best to try and keep it within 45 minutes, but please bear with us in case we take more than that. And of course, you'll also get a recording of this webinar soon after. So, if you want to catch up on the soccer game or you miss any portion of this, then, you can catch up with the recording. Also, feel free to ask questions anytime during the webinar on the Q&A box at the bottom. You don't have to hold your questions till the end, right? And without further ado, let me introduce you to our panelists today. Jay Dillon here probably needs no introduction, but in case you haven't heard of him, he's currently the Executive Director of Alumni Relations at the University of California, Berkeley. Jay has over 17 years of experience in alumni advancement in higher education. He's a skilled alumni strategist with expertise in alumni relations management, fundraising, and donor engagement. He's collaborated with renowned advancement professionals for multiple podcasts that are available on his website. Jay, you should probably leave a link to that on chat. In 2018, Jay was a founding member of Alumni Identity Fundraising Consultants, a consultancy that helps educational institutions accelerate philanthropy and improve fundraising outcomes. Thanks for joining us, Jay. Awesome. And the other panelist here is the very special Jenny Cooke Smith. Jenny currently serves as the Senior Director for AM Atlas Services at CASE. She specializes in analyzing advancement trends, interpreting comparison benchmarks, and helping people understand the stories behind the data. Prior to joining CASE, Jenny spent 15 years in a variety of positions within Blackbaud's target analytics, most recently leading DonorCentric's benchmarking cohorts, providing opportunities for institutions and organizations globally to review and discuss direct marketing and annual giving trends. She's currently co-teaching a course on CASE's global reporting standards and researching the latest trends on alumni engagement globally, and helping member institutions develop strategies using CASE's data and benchmarks. Thanks again for being here, Jenny.
Glad to be here. Hi, everyone.
Awesome. All right. So we'll start with reflecting back on how 2022 went by. Every year, Jay and I do this webinar where we talk about, our predictions, our recommendations, resolutions for the upcoming year. And as part of that tradition, we did this webinar about a year ago where we made some predictions for 2022. And now's the time to put ourselves on the spot here, see how things went. Let's start with the first one. Personalized content wins, persistence with DEIBJ is required. Jay, how do you feel about that a year from then?
Well, Kalyan, I'm really delighted to do this with you now for our third year in a row. We'll see how long we can keep this going. I think we're fortunate that DEIBJ has persisted, and that we work for a cause in higher education that is really leading the way when we talk about belonging and justice in our world, and keeping that top of mind for our country and culture. So I think we were right about that. I think we sort of get a C+ for personalized content, and let me explain. I think we've gotten better at targeting content in our communications. But we're still really defaulting to let's just send everyone everything and see what sticks. I think that remains an attractive approach, and I'm not sure how we can shift that without taking some risks. And I think sometimes advancement is viewed as one of the most risk-adverse nonprofit fundraising industries. So we've got to give ourselves enough time to test some things. I think personalized content can really trump broad-based communications in terms of ROI, but I don't know that we've given it a chance.
Yeah. Jenny, any thoughts on your side?
You know, we were just talking about that case at its Alumni Engagement Strategies conference last week, and I feel like this topic was very much important piece of it. So I'm hoping that when we sit here next year, we'll hear more about testing and segmentation. But the one thing I would say is if we look towards, you know, what this industry has been, and I think of that as very much this communication style that was inside out. You know, here's what the institution wants all of you to know. And as we move towards an outside in, and we're really trying to take into account what our alumni are telling us, that only works if we engage with them in the way they engage everywhere else. Where they're institutions, they should know. We should know about them. So I think this is the direction we have to go, no matter how hard it is.
Yeah, and the alumni-centric approach, which you spoke about, which is more about you versus I. And I remember, I think it was in the last year conversation that Jay and I were having, where I think Jay talked about a very simple test to say, pick up your latest communication piece, count the number of times you say we, the university, us, versus the number of times you say you. And that's just a simple test to say, are you really being alumni-centric? So I thought that was really interesting. The other thing that we also sort of spoke about a year ago in terms of one of the trends or one of the changes that we're going to see more of is engagement-led fundraising, right? I wanted to sort of add to sort of how I feel about that a year from when we spoke about it last. I don't think it's just engagement-led fundraising approach anymore. It's also about digital first, which I'm seeing. I just wanted to talk through that a little bit. What I'm clearly seeing is that the best advancement teams have realized and sort of evolved their fundraising model. While the old model was repetitive and reactive, you just send the same 2 appeals a year through mail, more or less the same content that is sent to everyone, send the alumni magazine, call them during the phone-a-thon, etc. I mean, what this meant was that obviously the alumni that are loyal will continue to give, but this is very much like a spray and pray approach that's primarily driven by loyalty, right? But the new model that shops are adopting is digital first in nature, much like modern marketing teams. They're creating useful content, useful tools like job boards, alumni directories. They're recognizing that alumni engagement is much broader than just event attendance or formal volunteering, right? And I know we'll talk more about that through the alumni engagement metrics. And I think tracking digital engagement as much as they can is really critical to this new model, right? Because it can help you analyze, which programs are working, which alumni are engaging, create smart segments, send targeted communication, and drive value, right? I mean, I think a good simple way to think about this is the following, right? Which is your alumni are getting incredible, personalized digital experiences from brands like Netflix, Starbucks, Amazon, etc. It almost feels to them that these companies understand their preferences and engages them accordingly. And as their university, you cannot afford to be generic and boring. You need to be able to engage them in very meaningful and personalized ways. And therefore, I think this engagement-led fundraising model, the digital-first fundraising model, is what more and more shops are adopting. I'll just take a pause there. Jay, anything you want to add to that?
I agree. This is the time of year that all of our mailboxes are full of solicitations from any number of great causes. And I think maybe 20 years ago, there was something to the fact that we could count on alumni and donors seeing our university logo on a letter and maybe pulling that letter out of the stack and setting the others aside or recycling the rest of them. And I don't think that's the case anymore. I think most of our I think attention is the currency of our digital age. And so we need to be wherever our alumni and donors are giving their attention. And that's a digital first approach, of course. What I'm thankful for is I think for years leading up to the pandemic, we as alumni engagement professionals have been shouting about how engagement is an unresourced function that leads principally to philanthropy. And I'm just glad that advancement is wising up. What do you think, Jenny?
I was just thinking, I don't know if the rest of you are addicted to those best of the year list, but I feel like if we had a best of the year for advancement, I actually think it's exactly what you just said, Jay. And that, we're seeing examples of whether it is the event is followed by an ask that is directly related to the event and really tying those outcomes together, or if it's just simply this notion of engagement leads to giving. Say it proudly. Like we have data that supports that, and I would also say it leads to giving and a lot of other outcomes. But this, I think, has been a massive shift I've seen really in just this last year, and I think it's incredibly exciting. I know we're not predicting yet, but that's a real positive point for me.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. I think the other thing, which I think is also an interesting observation from last year, was, Jay, you and I spoke about the potential mergers of advancement shops and broadly the centralization and the unification of some of the different parts of advancement. What's your thought a year down the line?
Yeah, that's not really happening, is it, Kalyan? I mean, not at the scale that you and I had hoped would be encouraged by the digital forward engagement. So I think while advancement has emerged from the pandemic as a more integrated operation, I think that is certainly true. The merging of alumni relations and fundraising under a single reporting vertical is still at many institutions elusive or not always the preferred route. I think it has to go back to what Jenny said, that if we're thinking about the limited resources that higher education will always have and the need for engagement to have a dollar sign on the horizon, it's time for us not to admit that as if it's something nasty, but to say yes. In fact, there's a phenomenal example here at UC Berkeley of the donor who made $1 million gift, an anonymous donor that took us over the threshold of our $6 billion campaign goal. This was about a month ago. That donor who made that $1 million gift, their very first transaction with the university post-graduation was purchasing a $10 Alumni Association membership. So let's talk about that. Let's not, as engagement professionals, shy away from measuring our work by a philanthropic outcome. I think this is where the case alumni engagement metrics give us some stepping stones in being able to make that case to leadership. So I don't think the merger has happened, Kalyan, but I've seen some better integration, and I'm going to predict again for next year that we will see more and more alumni and fundraising groups coming under a single executive.
Yeah, it's interesting. And Jenny, I think when we were chatting, you were talking about sort of the centralization of alumni relations and fundraising. What would you add to that in terms of what you saw from your vantage point this year?
Yeah, so I would agree. I mean, I don't know that we saw as much of that formal merger, but maybe a bigger surprise was that we started to see institutions, whether it was because they built dashboards and so had something to really meet with deans about and the academic leaders, but I think we started to see this space where a lot of programs were doing some nice efforts around engagement that were specific to let's reach out with a central voice and make sure that all of those campus partners and those academic partners are part of this journey. And I think that's really exciting. So, I think to me, that's an opportunity as we're thinking about in this next year, where I think we'll continue to see some shifts.
Yeah, I think what's interesting with what both of you said is we usually think about mergers and advancement as like departments and people coming together, but it's also about actually those data silos being broken and like the data being centralized and like everybody having democratized access to that data, right? Give me 1 second. I was still trying to figure out how to enable chat, but I'm not able to figure it out. I'm going to try with Jay as well. Jay and Jenny, I've made both of you co-hosts. So if I'm the guy that's supposed to be running the tech company, but I can't figure this out.
I'll see what I can do.
And I guess
I can transition us into that next point, Kalyan, about hybrid programming, because that was another big prediction that we made, and sort of related to the one previously about emerging strategies across advancement and alumni relations. And so for me, hybrid programming getting better, that's kind of a maybe. Do you think that's a yes, no, or a maybe, Jenny?
You know me, I never like to take the negative approach, but I actually would go more maybe to no on this. And I also think we just need, here's me as my standards hat on, but like, do we even know what we mean when we say hybrid? Because I think it has different meanings. And so I think that just understanding those components, but being here with Case, that has sort of been this bread and butter of in-person conferences. And this year where we had virtual and in-person and some things that were a little bit hybrid, it's just hard. I think we all know that we have limited capacity. And so I think getting those definitions and really thinking about the outcomes and what we're trying to accomplish, I just don't know if hybrid's our path forward.
Yeah. I see you in that answer. A very honest one. So what is hybrid? It's like when people tell you that they're using AI. Gosh, really? Will you explain that to me? But I mean, one of the things that I have observed, and with a little bit of chagrin, is just as we emerge from a lockdown pandemic and back into in-person activities, I think a lot of us felt pressure from trustees, board members, chapters and clubs, and other folks to return to an event forward strategy. And I think in some ways maybe we had to listen to them and give them the benefit of the doubt. But at least here at Berkeley, we're seeing a routine 50% attrition for in-person events. At our recent homecoming, which was hybrid, actually really was hybrid, our homecoming at the end of September, over 50% of the alumni who showed up, not those who registered, but over 50% of the alumni who showed up for homecoming did so only as a virtual attendee. So that I find fascinating, because homecoming in and of itself, just that phrase implies travel, coming back home. And yet we were able to see value in alumni joining some of our homecoming programming virtually. And that was fascinating. We did not see the same split among parents and donors, many of whom came to the events on campus, and they didn't participate virtually as much as alumni did. So there is a there for a hybrid approach. And I think we need to resist the urge to put together in-person activities simply because some of the more vocal alumni donor voices are telling us that we should.
And Jay, just for context, what was your attrition prior to the pandemic?
Oh, I think it was the same.
Okay.
I mean, Jenny, it was really going down. And I think all of us were experiencing that in 2019, at a decline in event attendance, reunion attendance, wondering what's going on. And as one of my colleagues puts it, there's only 52 Saturdays in a year. So what if you pick the Saturday that someone is doing something? There's really no way around that.
Yeah. I mean, we spoke about We do a lot of things from a 2022 context. One thing we didn't talk about last year, which I think was a miss from our side, is just like talking about alumni engagement metrics, right? Like we didn't talk about that, 12 months ago. I mean, the context here is it's been 4 years since the, alumni engagement metrics white paper by CASE came out. And I know CASE has been collecting data from member institutions every year. And, there's, as we were speaking, Jenny, there's been a clear increase in institutions realizing the need to capture engagement in this format and then adopting the survey from CASE. Let's talk about this now. Jenny, maybe I'd start with you. How are institutions today using alumni engagement metrics? What have you seen this year?
Yeah, and I think maybe just to feel like everybody's on the same page, because I do want to answer that question, but let's go through just a couple of key components. And I would say, if you have not read the white paper and you haven't done anything with metrics yet at your institution, this is your starting point. But if you want to advance this, Kalyan, what I would say in that white paper is check out the definitions, because as I said about hybrid, I think, the first thing that as an industry, when we pulled together volunteers from across the world, is that we even realize when we say alumni, there's not alignment on that. So clearly coming up with a common language for engagement, we had some real predecessors to take care of first. And so you'll see those definitions. And the piece I would say on this alumni engagement is the words mutually beneficial relationships. Again, it's all about that alumni-centric outlook. And if you advance us, what I want the group to know before we talk about how they're used is just these 4 buckets. So, and I'll weave in something we've learned this year because I think it's kind of fascinating. When CASE put this survey out several years ago, this is not an easy thing, right? I think a lot of us probably, if we were doing predictions, would have said things like, good luck, CASE, this is never really going to happen. So I actually feel really proud that, actually it has happened and we're seeing this adoption from the industry. At that time, we sort of said, let's just roll something simple out and see where it goes. And yes, we know we need weights and we know we need scores. We'll get there later. So as you can see here, the idea was this question of, did alumni engage in at least one of these 4 modes at least one time during the fiscal year? And we do have a guidance document that walks through every single activity really that you can count or not count. The interesting piece is that the thing I've heard as I've worked with more and more schools using this data is they're starting to find, we just adopted the CASE metrics. We didn't actually necessarily try to do a score weight. I'm not saying anything against that, but I think the exciting thing is there are segments, there are next steps, there are decisions you can make around messaging. There are really ways you can use this just by looking at this one simple question. Did they at least do one of these things? And then maybe did they two? Were these, who are alumni that do everything, but they don't give? Because before, in old terms, they just looked like a bunch of non-donors. But now, oh my goodness, these are really warm prospects that we should be thinking about cultivating because they clearly care about the institution.
Yeah, I think what's interesting for me from this sort of framework is just how simple it is, right? Yet how useful it is, right? Like, you don't need to be a data analyst to be able to really understand what's going on here, right? So that's what I think is really valuable. Jay, how are you at Berkeley? How are you using alumni engagement metrics? What are some of the things you've seen this year?
Well, we're using it in 2 ways, and I hope these are good examples for those of you who are kind of uncertain about where to go after counting these things. So in the first way, we're using it simply as a measure. So it's really important that you get better at counting these. So just to give you an example, at FY19, in the first year of the metrics at Berkeley, we reported only around 72,000 unique alumni engaged. That's out of a population of 572,469 living alumni. So we weren't counting right. Okay, we're not that bad at it. And this last year, we were able to report the number much more accurately at 162,000 alumni engaged. So that's important, just to get better at the counting. Second, we're using it as a discovery and analytics jumping off point. So you take all of this time to count things accurately. Don't stop there. Try slicing that data across any number of factors that would inform or challenge assumptions that you are making about where to build alumni strategy or invest in resources. So here's an example. We took a look at the case AEM metrics across the layer of race and ethnicity, because one of the assumptions made at Berkeley in the wake of many of the horrible and anti-Black and racist things happening in the June of 2020, one of the assumptions was that the university did not have a good relationship with its Black alumni. That assumption was based on several truthful anecdotes. But what did we find out in the data? As it turns out, Black alumni are twice as likely to be volunteers. They are twice as likely to be counted in experiences at events as event attendees. And they were actually twice as likely to open our alumni e-newsletter. Now, where were they not twice as likely to be? In philanthropy. But just think about that for a moment. When I took that information to the leadership and said, you know, our Black alumni population is showing up. We just don't see them because they're not showing up in philanthropy. But as it turns out, they're 2 times as likely to volunteer, read our communications, and come to our experiences as their white peers. So that changed our frame, and that allowed us to say, we need to invest in this population. And I was able to recruit for and hire a new position on my team specifically for that purpose. So after you spend the time to count these things accurately, don't stop there. Start with some analysis and look at race and ethnicity. Look at assumptions made about graduate and undergraduate alumni. Look at assumptions made about alumni who live close or far from the campus. At this homecoming that we had in the end of September, most of our attendees lived within 15 to 30 miles of the campus. So it was not the people who lived closest and not the people who lived furthest. So how would that challenge us as we think about where we spend money in inviting people to events? Maybe it's not the people across the street we should be paying attention to. It's the people who live a 30-minute or an hour drive away. So I just love being able to take the baseline that Jenny and Case has set for us and use it for some interrogatives. And I hope you will find those examples helpful.
And one thing I love about what you just said, Jay, is that you were talking about real outcomes and not just outputs of the data. You know, oh, we had more alumni that did this, or we got, you know, this group coming here, but really thinking about this idea of how do we translate this data to what is it we're trying to do. I'll just give a really quick plug for a couple of optional questions in the survey that I think, A, we'd love to have the benchmarks, and B, I think you would love to have the benchmarks. And that is, there's a new question this year. So for the 2022 data collection, that's around year of graduation, because that's another cut that I think we make assumptions about. But I can tell you our pilot data over the past couple of years has shown us that you know, if we look at sort of engagement by year since graduation, and we have our more recent, I won't say young, our more recent alumni here and our less recent alumni on the other side, it kind of looks like a U, where we're actually getting them engaged as volunteers and experientially and opening and taking action on our email at about the same rate as those less recent alumni. It's sort of in the middle where people get busy with careers and families that we might lose them a little bit. But as we're thinking about this notion of engagement leads to giving and other outcomes, I think knowing that they're interacting with us, that they're raising their hand early on, and this might be that long marathon that we all know is there, can be incredibly helpful as I love that idea again of what overlays can we add.
Yeah. And I think what stood out to me from what both of you are saying is just like keep it simple, right? Like again, like just to reiterate what you said, Jenny, like there's so much conversation about, causation, correlation, and like, it's just like people just like so many of us just get confused in that web. I think keeping it simple and just like you can just get a ton from just counting and just keeping it simple, right? I think there's a lot to say to that. I'm just going to quickly share my screen again, and thanks, Jay, for helping me with figuring out chat. One thing I just wanted to add also was just, I mean, one of the things that we've been doing, just trying to like on the Almabase tool, for example, working with Case, we've just tried to make this really simple, which is we track all of the engagement touch points, engagement activities that are happening, and just like simply categorize them across these 4 categories. This is your default report that you get on Almabase, but obviously you can customize it and things like that, which is just really useful for you to be able to just like identify, which of your alumni are engaging in any certain time period across each of these 4 categories, right? And I'm sure there's other tools out there that can help you with this. But one question that I had for you, Jenny, was, I mean, if there are institutions here in the audience that haven't really been participating in the alumni engagement survey, probably on the edge, thinking about it, what's your advice for these institutions?
Well, first of all, kudos to Almabase for making it as easy as possible. We really appreciate our partnership from the Case perspective. I think, I'll give a shout out to my friend Andy Shanlin, who's now with GG&A, was formerly at Brown. At the infancy of this survey, he sort of had some feelings about this survey, and we had a really great conversation that really led to us thinking about these metrics differently. And that was that we're not counting, we are in fact measuring, because to Jay's point, if 70,000 out of 500,000 were looking like they were engaged, we clearly weren't counting everyone doing that. And we're never going to probably get to that ultimate number. So if we think of measuring, meaning we're reducing the uncertainty about what we're trying to figure out, then I think that sort of lets us off the hook a little bit that we have to have it. And what we did in thinking about that was we do have a question that's a confidence level, which is putting it really out there with, hey, here's where we are right now. And maybe we have low confidence in every mode besides philanthropy. That's okay. You can benchmark to see, are other schools like me in the same boat, and how could I learn from them? But I also think it's, your measurement at the beginning, to Jay's point, might not necessarily be we're trying to engage more alumni, but we're sort of looking at this carrot for how do we just get more data, and how can we use that as our next step. I will also add, again, one of the really great highlights of this year is I feel like people are starting to get their handle on some of the communication data, especially alumni clicking through on emails. But a lot of schools still don't have that, and that's okay. In fact, we have a short version of the survey that's totally optional. So that there's, I would say if you haven't looked at it, or if it's been a while, try it, you'll like it. I think people have definitely sort of said, oh, we didn't realize that at the very basic level, there's a lot you can start to do without jumping in full force.
Yeah, it's awesome. Jay, one of the things that when you and I were chatting, you brought up, I don't remember the name of this shop, but the way they thought about alumni engagement metrics and how that impacted how they hired for that shop. I think that's a very interesting story. Can you like talk about that?
Yeah. I think we may have finally figured out the chat if folks want to put something in, but if not, lo siento. Sorry. But I did put my personal okay, Michelle, thank you. Yeah, the chat is working, and I'm going to drop my personal contact information in there again in case you didn't see it. And thanks, Mark Osborne, for the text. I appreciate that. And it's great to see Chase and so many other people on here. Okay, so let me give a shout out to one of my very good friends in this business, Dr. Craig Swinard. Okay, math PhD, who found himself as the inaugural Senior Director of Alumni Relations at Oregon Health Sciences University. about 2 years ago, and I've known Craig for a long time. So he and I were chatting about, how do you start something from scratch, and how do you start something from scratch at a university that's graduate only and focused in the health sciences. And Craig leapfrogged the way my mind thinks to say, I'm going to set up an office with 4 directors. Each director is going to have one AEM metric as their goal. So they will have no qualms about telling anybody how they are measured or what the return will be on their work. We will have a support staff that will support all of those folks and me. And they were off to the races. And I have been so impressed by what Craig has done at OHSU. And just the simplicity of that, of saying that we don't have to back out of years and years of tradition. So instead, we're going to focus one person's time on communications, and they will be measured by that. One person on experiences, one person on volunteering, and one person on connections to pipeline and philanthropy. I just find that fascinating. And so big ups to Craig. And I guess I'm giving some credit to the fact that he earned a PhD in math, which I don't think I ever could have done, but a really smart way to approach this work, Kalyan. Thanks for reminding me about that.
Yeah, I thought that story was really interesting because, like, of all the ways in which I've seen institutions, use alumni engagement metrics, I think this was a really interesting one, and I think it brings back the point of like what you measure is what gets done, right? And I think like just that clear focus in terms of how they've hired their team, I thought was like a really interesting insight, and I thought the audience would benefit from that. Jenny, maybe any final thoughts or any other interesting learnings, from this year related to alumni engagement metrics, and then maybe we can move on and start to talk about what we're predicting for 2023.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, what we're sharing with you is what I think of as kind of the highest level starting point. So, I am not telling you this is the only number that matters. As Kalyan said, I spent over a decade analyzing annual giving trends, and we all know that you have to look at all of the measures together to think about this. And I really foresee that's how we're going to start thinking about engagement. But that very first top metric you can see as we start to put those pieces together is this idea of let's count the number of alumni that engaged in at least one of those 4 modes, divided by the contactable base. So they're alive, they have a valid phone mail. Let me try that again. Phone, mail, or email, and that there's no reason keeping us from contacting them, like they've never, they haven't totally unsubscribed. That's going to get that engagement rate. So I tell you all this to say, if we're putting our crystal balls, I'm going to switch really quickly to thinking about future. I think we're going to start to see more and more schools moving away from this notion of alumni donor participation to this idea of engagement rate overall. And I'll talk a little bit more specifically about some ways that we think CASE is going to do that. The other piece I will just note is, for sure, as schools are starting to see that very, very top level and understanding that engagement rate, then I think we get into some more depth. And that's where we're starting to see, institutions telling us, okay, now we've got our conversion metrics in place. A couple of years ago, I think we would have said, we want to convert, but we're not sure from what to what. And now I'm starting to see schools sharing, like, we did it. Here are some really specific KPIs that we now have that are really specific to our priorities. And so I think that's really exciting, again, as we're seeing schools using these measures overall.
Yeah. Cool. Let's actually move on, and start to look into like what we're thinking or what we're seeing, what we're predicting for 2023. Just like we did for 2022, there was about 4 recommendations or predictions, and we spoke about how they played out. We're hopefully all going to be here a year from now to see how this goes for 2023. Let's start with the first one, recession and redemption. Jay, you brought this up, so I'm going to put you on the spot first.
I love those catchy phrases. Last year I was telling people how consistency eats creativity for lunch or something like that. So my phrase for this year is recession and redemption. So here's what I mean about that. I think that whatever happens in our economy next year, it's going to make our jobs more difficult. It's going to make fundraising more difficult. And as alumni engagement professionals, I think that puts us in a unique opportunity to redeem all of this wonderful engagement that we've accomplished over the last 2 years, and to really prove that when we deepen involvement among our alumni population, that it leads to increased giving. So I think that the AEM is a good place to start, but much as Andy Shanlin gave this feedback to Jenny, and I did too several years ago, you know, it can't just be about counting things. So you've got to figure out where those alumni are who are showing up in your metrics, who have emerged out of joyful anonymity. So this is the redemption part. In the middle of what might be a reception, our job is to redeem and cash in on the trust that our engagement over the last couple of years has developed. And I'll give a short example. Here at Berkeley, over the last 2 years, the last 4 semesters, we began offering 1 or 2 online courses to alumni for free. They were capped at around 1,500 or 2,000 participants, but taught by Berkeley faculty and in a real Berkeley intellectual experience. We've had about 9,000 alumni go through one of these courses in the last 2 years. So we took those 9,000 people and we overlaid the alumni engagement metrics. What did we find? 60% of those 9,000, so it's a really easy number, you know, somewhere around 6,000 people, had never attended a Berkeley event, and they had never volunteered for Berkeley. So 60% of these people were living in joyful anonymity somewhere, never coming to online events, never volunteering for anything. But as soon as we put this out there, it was the thing that they said, yes, I'll raise my hand, I want to do that. So we brought all of these new people into the pipeline. Well, then what happened? It turns out that those folks who completed the course were 3 or 4 times more likely to also be an annual donor in the year that they took the course. So now you're saying, well, Jay, causation or correlation? It doesn't matter. If somebody took the course and then they gave, or somebody gave and then took the course, the rising tide lifts all boats. And that's what I mean by redemption. So if you can find those engagement opportunities that you have been pushing out for the last 2 years, and using the metrics, you can uncover a group of alumni living in joyful anonymity, and then take a look among that group, what are the trends towards annual giving? You can make a really strong case for how engagement can lead to deeper involvement and increased philanthropy, even during a recession. So that's my pitch, Kalyan.
Recession and redemption. Love it. I mean, you're always good with these words. That's awesome. But
I know, I was wondering when they move from joyful anonymity, what is it called? Do you have that term yet?
Somebody needs to come up with that. Yeah.
I'm sure you'll have that by the next time we speak, Jenny. But yeah, thanks for sharing that, Jay. And I think that's a very important point, especially I'm sure like all fundraisers at this point are thinking about like, hey, what's 2023 going to look like, and how are we going to sort of like, you know, hit our goals? And I think like, yeah, redeeming all of the engagement that you know, we've done over the last couple of years makes a ton of sense. The second one that we have is Jenny, you wanted to talk about like the industry embrace of alumni engagement metrics and how you're predicting that this will play out in 2023.
Absolutely. So I actually don't even need my crystal ball for this one, because we've got some exciting things in the works. So my hope is that, you know, when we're all here together a year from now, we'll really talk about what this meant. But all of you know, or I'd hope you know, that of course part of the rankings for U.S. News and World Report, which could be a whole nother topic, but you know, 5% used to be alumni donor participation, and that was really meant to be an affinity measure. What sort of got this whole ball rolling down the hill as fast as it did was our CEO Sue Cunningham really dropping the mic on, this is an outdated metric. It's crazy that we're killing ourselves trying to get this measure that's not even really alumni affinity. And so moving forward, that's one of the reasons that it is now 3% of rankings, because US News said, we get it. What else are we going to do? And so we've sort of said, just wait, it's coming. And so this next year, we're really excited to partner with US News and World Report and include a question or a couple of questions. We're finalizing that bit on this year's survey to start to collect some data on engagement from institutions. Now, this won't be used in the rankings because, frankly, we haven't had 5 years of unchanged data to feel like we're ready for that. It also, we want the industry to embrace it. So we feel like this is similar to Jay's, I don't care if it's causation or correlation. I just want it to happen. We're really excited to get this on the minds of the IR folks, of your leadership that are thinking about that survey.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, that's also super exciting. Maybe like that just lays the path, like you said, Jenny, for potentially down the line that becomes the key metric in the US News rankings, as opposed to just donor participation, right? So it's awesome.
And what I would say, just to give you a number behind it, because that's what I do. In general, when we did look at engagement, about 40% of engagement comes from philanthropy. So basically, we've been missing 60% when we looked at this idea of if that was alumni affinity, we're not even getting the majority of the ways that alumni interact with our institutions.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we'll quickly run through a couple more. Now that chat is working, have any of you sort of observed the release of this system called ChatGPT? If any of you have seen it or playing around with it, just say yes on chat. Just want to see how many of you have observed it. So ChatGPT, for those of you that haven't seen it, is a system that's been released by a research company called OpenAI. It's an AI chatbot system which essentially can understand human language prompts and basically generate human-like written text in response. Honestly, it's as close to magic as I've ever experienced in my life. I mean, it's so good that I'm hearing so many conversations about hey, is this going to take our job away and things like that. But I think the most useful way to think about it is as an assistant that's helping you be better at your job and focus your time on important things, right? And I think what it really does well is sort of gets you off the ground really quickly on a lot of things, as opposed to starting from a blank screen, right? But you still need to add your magic to it, and that's when it becomes ready. So my, I guess, recommendation and prediction, for 2023 is that more of us in advancement will use these kinds of AI systems as assistants to help us, right? And I think you can use it in so many ways. I mean, and I've tried a lot of this myself. I mean, if we weren't running out of time, maybe I would have done a live try here. But I've tried looking at, hey, can you help me with pointers for a potential donor conversation? Here's the profile of the donor. Give me some ideas, right? Or can you help me write good donor thank you emails? Or can I find great alumni engagement ideas? From with the constraints that I have? Or can you help me craft really good fundraising appeals, or can you help me repurpose existing content? These are all, so many ways in which you can use an AI assistant. I'm very sure that other industries will adopt it, and I don't see why we all shouldn't, right? So that's why I wanted to include this. Jay, Jenny, anything you want to add, any experiences that you want to share from using any of these things?
I mean, my comment in the chat is we're all going to have a new best friend with these AI chatbots. It's a scary thing. I respect that prediction, Kalyan, and I have no doubt that we'll see more of that in our personal lives. I would love a year from now for someone to give us a case study about how it's really being applied intentionally in higher education.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I guess the last thing that I wanted to also talk about is What's been interesting as an observation is despite sort of all the growth in online giving over the last, few years, online giving is still only 2.7% of total fundraising for higher ed, right? I mean, every time I look at this stat, it blows my mind. I mean, even if you look at like sort of the broad nonprofit verticals outside of education, like online giving is about 12% of all giving. And like it reminds me of an age where like e-commerce sales like about a decade ago were only about 4% of overall sales, and now it's like 20% of overall sales. Like clearly there's like and the overall pie was also growing at the same time, right? And I think for universities and high schools, I think there is a huge opportunity to leverage this. I'm pretty confident that online giving will grow even more rapidly in 2023 and beyond. So yeah, I'll just kind of pause there. Jenny, Jay, anything you want to add to that in terms of like what you're seeing with online giving?
I mean, I'm with you. I think it's shocking that it's not a higher percentage. I think of some of this as potentially attribution because it gets tricky when we have all the channels. But I agree. I can't see that this doesn't continue to take off. I think what will be interesting is still being able to show that motivation to actually how the gift was made. Because I think that's what gets tricky with that online is that sourcing back to what inspired that gift to begin with. But either way, I think digital grows in both spaces.
Yeah.
I'm going to agree with Michelle in the chat who said, that there are barriers to making online giving easy at colleges and universities. This is my number one pet peeve over the course of the pandemic, when every other nonprofit on earth made it as simple as possible to give to a cause. We were still asking people to go 7-8 clicks deep to make a gift to the music department at Cal. I just think that's really unfortunate, and I'm not sure how we fix that because there is so much technical debt in our business. And I want to use that point to make a plug for a wonderful case conference that's coming up in March 28th and 29th in Chicago, one of my hometowns. It's a conference that I'm lucky enough to chair, and it's called Drive. It's the Case Data Conference, where everyone who thinks that data is what should inform our decision making will be there. And the theme for this conference this year is collaboration thrives at the data layer. And so I hope if you are somebody who believes in data or is curious about how data could help you convince leadership to make a change that is the right direction, that you will consider joining us in Chicago on March 28th and 29th. And my final pitch for that is that our opening keynote at the Case Conference will be from performers from the famed Second City Improv show in Chicago, who will be getting up on stage and leading conference attendees through a little bit of a workshop about how we bring skills from improv comedy into the way we think about collaboration and advancement. So that's the Case Drive Conference, March 28th and 29th.
Awesome. Let's see if there's any questions that Jay hasn't answered already. I mean, I just cannot believe, Jay, how good you are at this multitasking. Speaking, you're responding to questions here. You're unbelievable. Are there any questions you did not get to answer, Jay? Just last couple of minutes before we wrap up.
I think Joe put a great comment in just now. Newer nonprofits, smaller K through 12, parochial schools, college prep schools, you have the opportunity to jump in with a simple solution from the start. I think it's worth talking to Kalyan about Almabase and some of the things he's talked about today. But even any number of vendors that give you the opportunity to really take advantage of the moment in time where an alum might be on their couch at 11 o'clock at night, thinking about your school and your cause. And so they pick up their phone and they Google how to make a gift. If you can get that down to 2 or 3 clicks, that's golden.
Yeah. I would say the golden rule is like anybody should be able to make a donation from any device that they look you up on under 2 minutes. And I think if they can do that, that's phenomenal, right? Cool. I just wanted to end with this quick thing. We've actually Blackboard and Almabase together. We're releasing this new free ebook. It's called Modern Day Alumni Engagement and Fundraising. We talk a lot about like some of the things that we spoke about today. It sort of explores the latest trends in advancement and including how data can be used for better decision making. It has case studies of various institutions, some really interesting actionable strategies and things like that. So if you just leave a comment here on chat, just saying yes, if you're interested in the book, just say yes, and we'll just like pick all of your names and send you a copy of this ebook as soon as it's out in a couple of weeks. Perfect. I see a lot of them there. All right. Before we wrap up, any final comments, Jenny?
I was just going to put them into the chat, but I appreciate this opportunity to say it out loud. Well, one, thank you both so much for the opportunity to join you all. I will just add very briefly that we are still collecting data for fiscal 22 for the Alumni Engagement Metrics Survey. And if you ask me nicely, we could probably make an extension through the month of January. So if anything you heard today sparked some joy, do you think this is a bandwagon that you want to get on? Please feel free to reach out. I put my contact info in the chat. I'm more than happy to help. But I just feel like the future is bright. I'm excited to see what we have in front of us next year.
Amazing. Jay?
On a bit of a sentimental note, I am so impressed with what our business has done in 2022. We have really answered the call to support students and our institutions. And so I want to invite all of you to go home to your loved ones tonight and thank them. Thank your spouse, your kids, your parents, the people who have supported you and given you time to put your time into something that is terribly important, and that's higher education in this country. So as much as we feel good about what we do, I'm going to go home and say to my wife, Rosie, and my son, Alex, and daughter, Anya, a thank you. And I wish for everyone here a happy holidays and a very Merry Christmas.
So well said, Jay. Thank you so much, everyone. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and we'll see you all next year.
Thanks,
Ciao.
all.